A fishing boat is stopped in its tracks by a persistent dolphin. The fisherman's disbelief turns to astonishment when they learn why. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The morning sun cast long shadows across the deck of the Sea Wanderer as Jake Maxwell wiped the salt spray from his weathered face. At 53, he had spent more than 3 decades on these Florida waters, but lately, something felt different. The boat's diesel engine hummed steadily as his crew of 4 prepared for another day of fishing. Water temperature's up again, Tom, Jake's first mate, announced while checking the instruments. Third time this month, we're seeing numbers above average. He was a stocky man in his 40s who had worked with Jake for the past 12 years. Jake nodded, studying the horizon. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, but there was an undercurrent of tension in their movements. The past few seasons had been increasingly difficult, with smaller catches and rising fuel costs cutting into their already thin margins. Remember when we could predict exactly where the schools would be? Mike, the youngest crew member at 26, called out while checking the nets. Now it's like playing lottery with these changing patterns. The conversation shifted to the practical challenges they faced. Sarah, their marine technician, pulled up recent catch data on her tablet. "Look at these numbers," she said, pointing to a graph. "Our hauls are down 30% compared to 5 years ago. The migration patterns are all over the place." The 5th crew member, Ray, an old-timer who had been fishing these waters since before Jake was born, spat over the side. "Been telling you all, something's not right with the water. Fish don't just change their habits for no reason." As they prepared to cast the first nets of the day, Jake listened to the ongoing debate among his crew. The discussion wasn't new. They'd been having variations of it for months now. Climate change wasn't just a distant concept anymore. It was affecting their livelihood in very real ways. "First net ready," Tom called out, breaking through Jake's thoughts. The mechanical whir of the winch filled the air as they began their familiar routine. The net unfurled behind the boat, spreading wide in the crystal-clear waters. That's when they saw it. A flash of gray breaking the surface about 50 yards off the starboard side. A dolphin, larger than average, breached the water in an unusual pattern. Instead of the playful arcs these creatures typically made, this one's movement seemed urgent, almost frantic. "Would you look at that?" Mike said, pointing at the dolphin as it circled back toward their boat. "Something's got it all worked up." Sarah stepped away from her station, watching the dolphin with professional interest. "That's not normal behavior," she noted, reaching for her camera. Ray laughed dismissively. "It's just a dolphin being a dolphin. We got work to do." The dolphin breached again, closer this time, its tail slapping the water hard enough to spray the deck. Jake felt an uncomfortable tightening in his chest. In all his years at sea, he'd never seen a dolphin act quite like this. "Maybe we should hold off on the nets for a minute," Jake suggested, earning a chorus of groans from Ray and Mike. "Since when do we let a fish tell us how to do our job?" Ray scoffed, continuing to prepare the second net. Tom stepped beside Jake, following his gaze to the agitated creature. "Boss, we're burning daylight and fuel out here." The dolphin made another pass, this time emitting a series of sharp clicks and whistles that carried clearly across the water. Jake watched as it dove deep, then resurfaced, repeating the pattern with increasing intensity. "It's just some over-friendly bottlenose," Mike said with a laugh, probably hoping we'll throw at some fish. But Jake could, and shake the feeling that something was wrong. 30 years on the water had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every one of them was telling him this wasn't normal dolphin behavior. Sarah continued documenting the encounter with her camera, her expression growing more concerned. "This is definitely unusual behavior for a solitary dolphin," she said, reviewing the footage. "It's displaying signs of distress." The crew's mockery faded into background noise as Jake maintained eye contact with the dolphin each time it surfaced. There was an intelligence in those eyes that seemed to be trying to communicate something urgent. Jake stepped closer to the starboard rail, his eyes fixed on the dolphin's erratic movements. The morning sun now hung higher in the sky, its reflection creating a shimmer on the water that made tracking the marine mammal more challenging. "Hold the second net," Jake ordered, raising his hand to silence the immediate protest from his crew. The dolphin's behavior was becoming more intense, diving deeper, surfacing with explosive force, and emitting increasingly loud vocalizations. "We're losing prime fishing time," Ray grumbled, but Jake ignored him. Decades of experience had taught him that unusual animal behavior often signaled something important. He grabbed a pair of polarized binoculars from the wheelhouse and began scanning the water systematically. The dolphin's pattern became clearer now. It would swim in a tight circle, then dart about 50 yards away, only to return to the same spot. Each time it completed this circuit, its clicks and whistles grew more frantic. Sarah joined Jake at the rail, her tablet now recording the dolphin's sound patterns. "These vocalizations are consistent with distress calls," she reported, showing him the sound waves on her screen. "And look at this, they're getting more concentrated." Jake handed the binoculars to Tom. "Take a look at that spot where it keeps returning. Tell me what you see." Tom adjusted the focus, tracking the dolphin's movement. After a few moments, his posture stiffened. "Boss, I think there's something down there. Can't make it out clearly, but there's definitely movement below the surface." The crew gathered at the rail now, their earlier skepticism giving way to curiosity. The dolphin, seeming to sense their attention, increased the intensity of its display, repeatedly diving and surfacing near the spot it had been circling. "Bring us in closer," Jake instructed Ray, who had taken the helm. "But keep it slow. We don't want to spook whatever's down there." As the boat edged forward, the water's clarity improved. Jake leaned over the rail, straining to see deeper into the azure depths. That's when he caught it, a flash of movement about 15 feet below the surface. "There!" Sarah pointed, her voice tight with concern. "It's another dolphin, a smaller one." The situation suddenly became clear. The adult dolphin wasn't just acting strangely, it was trying to get help. Its calf was trapped below, though from what, they couldn't yet tell. "Get the underwater camera ready," Jake ordered, already moving toward the diving gear they kept for net emergencies. "Tom, help me with the equipment." "Sarah, get tracking both dolphins." "Mike, prepare the rescue gear." Ray's voice cut through the activity. "Are we really going to halt an entire day's work for this?" Jake turned to face his oldest crew member. "That mother's been asking for our help the only way she knows how. Would you rather we ignore her and live with that?" The urgency of the situation became even more apparent as they watched the mother dolphin's increasingly desperate attempts to reach what they now could clearly see was her trapped calf. The younger dolphin's movements were restricted, though they still couldn't determine the exact cause. "Camera's picking up something," Sarah called out, adjusting the underwater monitor. "There's some kind of debris down there. It looks like old fishing nets." Jake finished for her, recognizing the shadowy shapes beneath the surface. His jaw tightened. Ghost nets, abandoned fishing gear that continued to trap and kill marine life, were a growing problem he'd seen too often. The mother dolphin approached their boat now, closer than before, her behavior shifting from frantic to almost pleading. She kept her blowhole above water longer, her eye visibly fixed on Jake as if recognizing him as the decision-maker. "I'm going in," Jake announced, already stripping off his outer layers. "Tom, you're with me. Sarah, keep monitoring both dolphins and maintain communication. Mike, stand by with the rescue equipment. Ray," he paused, looking at his oldest crew member, "I need you to keep the boat steady." Ray met his gaze for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Just don't get yourself killed over a couple of fish," he muttered, but his tone had lost its edge. As Jake prepared to enter the water, the magnitude of what they were about to attempt settled over the crew. One wrong move could endanger not only the trapped calf, but also themselves. Yet the alternative, ignoring this clear call for help, wasn't something Jake could live with. The rescue operation proved more challenging than anticipated. Jake and Tom descended into the warm Florida waters, the mother dolphin maintaining a watchful distance as they approached her trapped calf. The underwater visibility was good, but the situation was precarious. "I can see where the net's caught." Jake's voice crackled through the communication system. The calf had become entangled in a section of abandoned fishing net that had snagged on some debris on the seafloor. The young dolphin's tail fin was wrapped in the synthetic mesh, restricting its movement to a small area. From above, Sarah monitored their oxygen levels and kept track of both dolphins' positions. Mother's staying about 20 feet away, watching. Calf's vital signs appear stable, but its breathing rate is elevated. Jake and Tom work methodically, careful not to startle either dolphin. The calf, though frightened, seemed to understand they were trying to help. It remained relatively still as they began cutting away at the netting with specialized tools. "This isn't recent netting," Tom observed through his communicator. "Look at the algae growth. This has been down here for months, maybe longer." The revelation added a layer of guilt to their work. This was the kind of debris that responsible fishing operations were supposed to prevent. The mother dolphin's behavior shifted as they worked. Her frantic circles transformed into a more purposeful patrol, swimming in a protective pattern around the rescue operation. She emitted occasional clicks and whistles, seemingly communicating with her calf. "Oxygen at 70%, Sarah reported from above. "You've got about 15 minutes before you need to surface." The work was delicate. One wrong cut could tighten the nets further around the calf's tail. Jake's experienced hands moved steadily, while Tom held the netting taut to prevent it from tangling further. "Almost there," Jake announced after what felt like hours, but was only minutes. "Last section is wrapped pretty tight. Tom, hold the calf steady if you can." The young dolphin seemed to sense freedom was close. It remained surprisingly calm as Tom carefully placed his hands on its sides, stabilizing it while Jake worked on the final strands of netting. "Got it!" Jake's triumphant voice came through the comm system. The last pieces of netting fell away, and the calf immediately shot upward, nearly knocking Tom backward with its sudden movement. The mother dolphin's reaction was immediate. She rushed to her calf, the two of them touching briefly before beginning to swim in tight, joyful circles around each other. The crew above broke into spontaneous cheers, their voices carrying through the water to Jake and Tom as they began their ascent. Bah! CK on the boat. The atmosphere had transformed completely. Even Ray, who had been the most skeptical, watched the reunited dolphins with poorly concealed amazement. "Look at them," Mike said softly, pointing to where the dolphins now swam playfully near the boat. The mother would occasionally look directly at the vessel, particularly at Jake, who was still removing his diving gear. Sarah was already documenting everything. "This kind of behavior is remarkable," she explained, her camera tracking the dolphins' movements. "They're not just relieved, they're showing gratitude." This level of interaction and apparent recognition is something scientists have documented, but rarely get to witness firsthand. The mother and calf stayed near the boat for several minutes, performing what seemed like an underwater ballet. The mother would occasionally surface near the boat, making direct eye contact with crew members before diving back to her calf. "I've never seen anything like it," Tom admitted, still catching his breath from the dive. "The way they're looking at us, it's like they understand exactly what we did." The crew gathered at the rail, watching the display. The earlier tensions about lost fishing time had evaporated, replaced by a shared sense of accomplishment and wonder. Even Ray stepped forward, shaking his head in amazement. "Maybe there's more to these creatures than I gave them credit for," he conceded, watching as the dolphins made one final pass by the boat. Jake stood silently, his wet clothes dripping on the deck, observing the scene. The connection he felt with these intelligent creatures was profound, stirring something deep within him. It wasn't just about saving a trapped animal. It was about recognizing their responsibility to the ocean and its inhabitants. The dolphins finally began to swim away, but not before the mother made one last pass by the boat, lifting her head above the water in what appeared to be a final gesture of acknowledgement. The crew watched until they disappeared beneath the waves, leaving behind a changed atmosphere on the Sea Wanderer. As the day progressed, Jake found himself lost in memories of his grandfather, old Jack Maxwell, who had taught him everything he knew about fishing. The rescue of the dolphins had stirred up long-dormant lessons from those early days on the water. In the boat's small galley, during their delayed lunch break, Jake shared these memories with his crew. "My grandfather used to say that the sea gives us our living, but we owe it our respect in return," he began, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee. The cramped space felt intimate as the crew listened, their own meals temporarily forgotten. The morning's events had created an unusual atmosphere of reflection among them all. Back then, they didn't have the sophisticated equipment we use today, Jake continued. They had to understand the sea's patterns, the behavior of marine life. They couldn't just rely on technology to find fish. They had to work in harmony with the ocean itself. Sarah leaned forward, her scientific mind engaged. That's actually backed by research. Traditional fishing methods often had built-in conservation practices that we've lost in modern industrial fishing. Jake nodded, remembering his grandfather's weathered face and careful instructions. He used to take me out before dawn, teaching me to read the water, understand the winds, respect the creatures we shared the sea with. He called it listening to the ocean's story. But times have changed, Ray interjected, though his usual gruffness was tempered. We've got quotas to meet, bills to pay. Can't fish like it's 1950 anymore. Maybe that's exactly our problem, Tom suggested, surprising everyone with his thoughtfulness. We're so focused on immediate profits that we're destroying the very thing that provides for us. Jake stood up, his decision made. I'm calling a full crew meeting for tomorrow morning. We need to tell Kay about changing how we operate. The announcement met with mixed reactions. Mike and Sarah exchanged hopeful glances, while Ray's expression darkened. Tom remained neutral, though his eyes showed curiosity. Later that afternoon, Jake began preparing for the meeting in his small captain's cabin. He pulled out old logbooks, some dating back to his grandfather's time, comparing catch records across decades. The decline was stark when laid out in black and white. He drafted a proposal for new operating procedures, using more selective fishing methods, avoiding juvenile fishing grounds, implementing stricter guidelines for preventing gear loss, and establishing protocols for marine life encounters. The sound of footsteps outside his cabin interrupted his work. It was Ray, looking uncomfortable but determined. Got a minute, Jake? The older man settled into the spare chair without waiting for an answer. Been thinking about what happened today, and about how things used to be. Jake set aside his papers, giving Ray his full attention. This was unusual. Ray rarely sought private conversations. I've been fighting changes because I'm scared, Ray admitted, his voice rough. Scared that if we change too much, we'll lose everything. But after today, seeing those dolphins, he trailed off, searching for words. Change doesn't have to mean loss, Jake replied carefully. It might mean finding a better way. Their conversation was interrupted by Tom's voice over the intercom, announcing that several crew members from other boats had heard about the dolphin rescue and were requesting to attend tomorrow's meeting. Jake's proposal was evolving into something bigger than he'd initially planned. He spent the rest of the evening revising his notes, expanding the scope to include potential collaboration with other fishing boats in the area. The sun was setting when Jake finally emerged on deck. The ocean had calmed to a gentle swell, the sky painted in brilliant oranges and purples. He stood at the rail, remembering his grandfather's words. The sea remembers those who respect her, son. She's got a long memory and a fair heart. Tomorrow's meeting would be challenging. He knew there would be resistance, concerns about costs, and fear of change. But the image of those dolphins, the mother's intelligent eyes seeking his help, had awakened something that couldn't be ignored. The morning of the workshop dawned clear and bright. Jake had transformed the local community center's main room into an impromptu conference space, with help from Sarah, who'd arranged for marine conservation experts to join them. The turnout was larger than expected. Nearly 50 local fishermen packed the room, along with representatives from environmental organizations. Dr. Maria Rodriguez, a marine biologist specializing in sustainable fishing practices, stood at the front of the room beside Jake. Her presence lent credibility to the gathering, though some of the older fishermen viewed her with obvious skepticism. The numbers don't lie, Dr. Rodriguez began, pulling up charts on the projector. Fish stocks in our waters have declined by 45% in the last decade. But here's the good news. Sustainable practices can reverse this trend while maintaining profitable operations. The room buzzed with mixed reactions. Jake stepped forward, sharing his crew's recent experience with the dolphins. The story captured attention, but it was the practical implications that followed that really sparked engagement. We're not here to put anyone out of business, Jake assured the crowd. We're here to ensure there's still a business to pass down to our children. He introduced a comprehensive monitoring system that would track marine life encounters, ghost nets, and fishing patterns. Tom stood up from his seat, addressing his fellow fishermen. Yesterday, we spent 2 hours helping those dolphins. Today, our catch was better than it's been in months. The spots we found AF. After changing our route, they were rich with fish. Maybe there's something to this whole ecosystem approach. The presentation shifted to practical demonstrations. Dr. Rodriguez showed videos of successful sustainable fishing operations from other coastal communities. The evidence was compelling. Boats that adopted these practices often saw initial drops in catch sizes, but experienced long-term stability and even growth. Look at this data from the Mediterranean, she pointed out. After implementing similar programs, their fishing communities saw a 20% increase in annual revenue within 3 years. The mood in the room began to shift. Questions changed from skeptical to practical. How much does the monitoring equipment cost? What kind of training would we need? Are there grants available for transitions like this? Jake had anticipated these concerns. He unveiled a partnership proposal with local marine conservation groups willing to subsidize the necessary equipment. Sarah followed with a presentation on available government grants for sustainable fishing initiatives. Ray, to everyone's surprise, stood up to share his own perspective. I've been fishing these waters for 40 years, he began, his voice gruff but sincere. Never thought I'd say this, but yesterday showed me something important. Maybe it's time we started fishing smarter, not just harder. The workshop continued through the afternoon, breaking into smaller groups to discuss specific aspects of implementation. Jake moved between discussions, answering questions and addressing concerns. He noticed younger fishermen particularly engaged with the technology aspects, while veteran captains focused on traditional knowledge integration. Social media became an unexpected ally. Mike had been documenting the workshop, sharing highlights online. By mid-afternoon, local news outlets had picked up the story, spreading the message beyond their immediate community. This is just the beginning, Jake addressed the group as the workshop wound down. We're not just changing how we fish, we're changing how we think about our relationship with the ocean. The proposal for a formal monitoring system gained significant support. Several boat captains volunteered for a pilot program, eager to prove that sustainable practices could be profitable. As people filed out, Dr. Rodriguez pulled Jake aside. What you've started here, it's remarkable. Most communities resist change until they're forced into it. You're ahead of the curve, but not everyone was convinced. Jake noticed a small group of fishermen huddled near the exit, their expressions dark. Among them was James Carter, owner of one of the largest fishing operations in the area. His company's aggressive fishing practices were well known, and his absence from the workshop discussions had been conspicuous. The day ended with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Jake had achieved more than he'd expected, but he knew the real challenges lay ahead. Implementation would test their commitment, and resistance from powerful industry figures like Carter could pose significant obstacles. The mobilization of the coastal community happened faster than anyone anticipated. Within weeks of the workshop, Jake's initiative had sparked a movement that extended beyond just fishing practices. The town of Cedar Key, once known primarily for its seafood industry, was transforming into a hub of environmental awareness. Jake found himself at the center of it all, though the role of community leader sat uncomfortably on his shoulders. His days now split between fishing and organizing environmental activities. The Sea Wanderer became a floating classroom of sorts, hosting educational tours for local schools and environmental groups. Look at this, Sarah said one morning, showing Jake her tablet. Their story had gone viral on social media, with the hashtag Sustainable Seas trending in marine conservation circles. Videos of their sustainable fishing practices, interwoven with the dolphin rescue story, had caught the attention of regional environmental organizations. The beach cleanup events became weekly occurrences, drawing increasingly larger crowds. What started as a small group of fishermen and their families expanded to include tourists, local businesses, and even some unlikely allies from neighboring communities. We collected over 2 tons of debris last weekend, Mike reported during a crew meeting. He had taken charge of documenting their efforts, creating compelling social media content that resonated with younger audiences. And the best part? 3 more fishing crews have signed up for our monitoring program. The youth engagement was particularly encouraging. Local high school students started a marine conservation club, with Jake's crew serving as mentors. They taught teenagers about sustainable fishing practices, marine biology, and the importance of ocean conservation. "These kids get it," Tom observed, watching a group of students practicing not tying on deck. "They understand that their future depends on how we treat the ocean today." The movement gained momentum in unexpected ways. Local restaurants began prominently displaying sustainably sourced labels on their seafood dishes, creating market pressure for responsible fishing practices. The town council, sensing the shifting tide, started discussions about making Cedar Key a model for sustainable coastal communities. Ray, once the biggest skeptic, had become one of their strongest advocates. His years of experience and straight-talking style made him particularly effective at convincing other veteran fishermen. "I've seen these waters change," he would tell them. "We either change with them, or we won't have anything left to fish." Jake organized a community forum where fishermen could share their experiences with the new practices. Success stories began to emerge. Decreased fuel costs due to more efficient routing, better quality catches through selective fishing, and even premium prices for sustainably caught fish. The Sea Wanderer itself became a symbol of the transformation. Jake and his crew modified their gear to minimize environmental impact, installed advanced monitoring systems, and documented everything. Their methods, though initially more time-consuming, were proving increasingly efficient as they refined their approach. However, not everything was smooth sailing. Some community members remained resistant to change, arguing that traditional fishing methods had sustained families for generations. The costs of new equipment and monitoring systems posed real challenges for smaller operations. Jake addressed these concerns head-on, working with local banks to create special financing programs for sustainable fishing equipment. He also established a mentorship system where experienced crews helped others transition to new methods. The movement reached a significant milestone when the local Marine Research Center proposed a partnership. They wanted to use data collected by the fishing fleet to study marine ecosystem health. This collaboration would provide scientific validation for their efforts while contributing to broader understanding of ocean conservation. As the sun set one evening, Jake stood on the deck of his boat, watching young volunteers clean up the beach. The sight of teenagers carefully documenting each piece of trash, discussing marine conservation, and planning future initiatives filled him with hope. Sarah joined him at the rail. "Remember when we thought we were just saving one dolphin?" she asked, smiling. "Look what it started." The transformation of Cedar Key was becoming a model for other coastal communities. Journalists and environmental organizations began visiting, documenting their methods and successes. The small fishing town was earning a new reputation as a pioneer in sustainable marine practices. The local conference center buzzed with anticipation on as Jake and his crew prepared for their presentation at the Marine Conservation Summit. What started as a local initiative had caught the attention of regional environmental organizations, leading to this invitation to share their story. Jake stood backstage, reviewing his notes nervously. Public speaking had never been his strong suit. He was more comfortable on his boat than behind a podium. Sarah approached, holding a tablet displaying their presentation materials. "The satellite data is ready," she said. "We'll show them the before and after comparisons of our fishing grounds. The recovery patterns are remarkable." Their presentation began with the dolphin rescue video, now professionally edited with Mike's footage. The audience leaned forward as Jake described that pivotal moment, but it was the data that followed that really captured their attention. "In just 6 months," Jake explained, pointing to the charts, "we've seen a 15% increase in fish populations within our monitored zones. Our fuel costs have dropped by 20% due to more efficient routing, and our catch quality has improved significantly." Tom stepped forward to detail the technical aspects of their monitoring system, while Sarah presented the scientific data. Ray, surprisingly comfortable in front of the crowd, shared personal stories about the transformation of veteran fishermen's attitudes. The presentation was going well until the Q&A session. James Carter, CEO of Atlantic Fishing Enterprise, stood up from the back row. His company was one of the largest commercial fishing operations on the coast, known for its aggressive industrial practices. "This all sounds very noble," Carter's voice carried across the room. But let's talk real numbers. How many jobs will be lost if we implement these restrictions? How many families will suffer while we wait for your fish populations to recover? The room tensed. Jake had anticipated opposition, but Carter's public confrontation raised the stakes significantly. Before he could respond, Ray stepped forward. "I've been fishing these waters for 40 years. Ray's voice was steady. "You want to talk real numbers? Let's talk about how many jobs will be lost when there's nothing left to fish. Your methods are killing our future." Carter smiled coldly. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills, old man. We're running a business, not a marine sanctuary." Jake intervened, pulling up additional data. "Actually, let's look at the economic projections." He displayed graphs showing long-term sustainability models. "Our methods are already showing higher profit margins per catch, lower operational costs, and most importantly, guaranteed future stocks." The debate intensified as other industry representatives joined in. Some supported Jake's approach, while others aligned with Carter. The discussion revealed a deep divide within the fishing community, between those embracing change and those fighting to maintain traditional industrial practices. As the conference continued, Jake noticed something concerning. Carter was huddled with a group of industry executives, their expressions serious as they examined documents. Sarah caught his attention, showing him her tablet. Their social media mentions had suddenly filled with negative comments about job-killing environmentalists. During the lunch break, Tom overheard a conversation that confirmed their fears. Carter's company was preparing to launch a campaign against their movement, painting them as threats to the fishing industry's survival. "They're planning to pressure our suppliers," Tom reported. "They're also talking about legal action, claiming our methods violate existing fishing regulations." Jake gathered his crew in a quiet corner of the conference center. The situation was escalating beyond their expectations. What started as a local initiative was now threatening powerful industry interests. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Jake reminded them. "But we've got something they don't, proof that our methods work, and a community that supports us." As they returned to the conference floor, Jake noticed something unexpected. Several younger executives from other fishing companies were approaching them, expressing interest in their methods. The industry wasn't as unified behind Carter as he wanted to appear. The day ended with mixed results. Their presentation had been successful, but they'd also gained powerful enemies. As they packed up their materials, Jake received a text message from an unknown number. "Back off now, or you'll regret it. Some things should stay the way they are." The campaign against Jake and his team escalated rapidly in the weeks following the conference. Carter's company, Atlantic Fishing Enterprise, launched a sophisticated media offensive, publishing investigative reports questioning their methods and motives. Local newspapers ran headlines like "Traditional Fishing Jobs Threatened by Radical Environmental Agenda" and "Small-Town Captain or Environmental Extremist." The stories twisted their sustainable fishing initiative into a threat to the community's economic stability. Jake sat in his captain's cabin, reviewing the latest round of attacks. A stack of papers on his desk included canceled contracts from suppliers, letters from concerned business partners, and increasingly hostile messages from industry representatives. "They're hitting us where it hurts," Tom reported during an emergency crew meeting. "3 of our regular buyers have pulled out, citing business concerns. We all know Carter's behind it." Sarah pulled up their financial projections on her tablet. "We can maintain operations for about 3 months with our current reserves. After that," she left the sentence hanging. The pressure wasn't just economic. Strange incidents began occurring. Equipment mysteriously malfunctioning, anonymous calls to the Coast Guard reporting false violations, and rumors spreading through the community about Jake's hidden agenda. Ray slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't about fishing anymore. They're trying to destroy everything we've built." His voice carried the weight of betrayal. Some of his oldest friends in the industry had turned against them. Jake found himself staring at the photo of his grandfather that hung in his cabin, remembering the dolphin rescue that started it all. The memory strengthened his resolve, but doubt crept in during quiet moments. The cost of standing up to industry giants was becoming painfully clear. Mike's social media monitoring revealed a coordinated disinformation campaign. "They're using bot accounts to spread false stories about us," he explained. "Claims about illegal fishing practices, environmental violations, even personal attacks on crew members. The tension reached a breaking point when Jake discovered his boat had been vandalized overnight. The words "sell out" were spray-painted across the hull, and expensive monitoring equipment had been damaged. That evening, Jake called his crew together. "I won't blame any of you for walking away," he said, looking each member in the eye. "This fight is getting dangerous, and you've all got families to think about." The response was immediate. Sarah stepped forward first. "We're not just fighting for fish anymore. This is about the future of our oceans." The others nodded in agreement. Even as the weight of their decision hung heavy in the air, they began documenting everything. Every threat, every canceled contract, every suspicious incident. Other boat captains who had adopted their methods reported similar pressures, creating a network of affected fishermen. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A junior executive from Atlantic Fishing Enterprise, troubled by the company's tactics, reached out anonymously. He provided documents showing a coordinated effort to discredit sustainable fishing practices, fearing they would expose the company's environmental violations. Jack, he found allies in unexpected places. Environmental lawyers offered pro bono services, marine conservation groups provided additional funding, and local journalists began investigating Carter's company instead of just publishing their press releases. A group of young fishermen, inspired by Jake's stand, formed a coalition for sustainable fishing practices. They shared resources, information, and support, strengthening their position against industry pressure. Through it all, Jake held on to the memory of the Dolphin mother's trust in them. "We're not just fighting for our way of life," he told his crew during a particularly tough day. "We're fighting for every creature that depends on these waters." The opposition grew, increasingly desperate. Carter's company began offering significant buyouts to fishermen who would abandon sustainable practices. Some accepted, but many stood firm, inspired by Jake's resistance. As pressure mounted, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He called a meeting with other affected boat captains, proposing they unite formally. "Alone, they can pick us off one by one," he said. "Together, we're stronger than they think." The formation of the Sustainable Seas Alliance marked a turning point in the conflict. What began as a group of local fishermen quickly grew into a regional movement, with boats from neighboring ports joining their cause. Jake's crew transformed their operation into a command center for coordinated action. The Alliance's first major action was a series of peaceful protests against industrial fishing practices. Dozens of boats, flying green flags symbolizing their commitment to sustainable fishing, formed blockades around known areas of illegal fishing activity. "We're not just protecting fish stocks," Jake announced to reporters covering the protests. "We're protecting a way of life that can sustain future generations." His words, broadcast across local and national news networks, resonated with coastal communities facing similar challenges. Sarah organized a team of marine scientists to document the environmental impact of industrial fishing in their waters. Their findings were damning, showing widespread damage to coral reefs, illegal dumping of fishing gear, and systematic violation of fishing quotas. "Look at these satellite images," she explained during a press conference, displaying before and after photos of marine habitats. "The destruction is undeniable, but so is the recovery in areas where sustainable practices have been adopted." The media narrative began to shift. Stories of small boat fishermen standing up to corporate giants captured public imagination. Social media campaigns, led by Mike, shared powerful images of marine life returning to protected areas and families continuing generations-old fishing traditions through sustainable methods. Carter's company responded with increasingly aggressive tactics. They filed lawsuits against Alliance members, claiming economic interference and defamation. Their lobbyists pushed for legislation that would make their sustainable fishing methods effectively illegal. Jake found himself speaking at town halls, city council meetings, and environmental forums. His straightforward manner and practical experience made him a compelling advocate. "We're not asking for special treatment," he would say. "We're asking for the right to fish in a way that ensures there will still be fish to catch tomorrow." The Alliance gained unexpected support from the restaurant industry. High-end establishments began exclusively featuring sustainably caught fish, creating a premium market for their catches. Local chefs hosted events highlighting the superior quality of fish caught using selective methods. Tom developed a training program for other fishing crews interested in transitioning to sustainable practices. It's not just about changing equipment, he explained during sessions. It's about changing how we think about our relationship with the ocean. Ray's network of veteran fishermen proved invaluable. They provided testimonies about the changes they'd witnessed in marine ecosystems over decades, lending historical weight to their arguments for conservation. The alliance's momentum grew, but so did the stakes. Carter's company launched a media campaign questioning the economic viability of sustainable fishing. They published studies claiming that traditional industrial fishing was the only way to meet global seafood demand. Jake and his team countered with their own data. 6 months of detailed records showed that sustainable practices, while initially more expensive, resulted in better quality catches and lower operational costs over time. Local environmental organizations joined their cause, organizing beach cleanups and marine education programs that ran alongside alliance activities. The movement began to transcend fishing industry concerns, becoming a broader environmental justice issue. The pressure reached a crescendo when Carter's company threatened to close their local processing plant, potentially eliminating hundreds of jobs. The threat was clearly meant to turn the community against the alliance. Instead, it backfired. Community members rallied behind the alliance, organizing support networks for affected workers and proposing alternative employment in sustainable fishing operations. The threat had revealed the company's willingness to sacrifice local livelihoods for profit. As tensions peaked, Jake received an unexpected message. A group of shareholders from Atlantic Fishing Enterprise requested a private meeting. Their growing concern about the company's practices and the negative publicity surrounding the conflict suggested a possible breakthrough. The fundraising event at Cedar Keys Maritime Museum became the unexpected setting for the story's climax. Jake stood at the podium, preparing to address supporters of the Sustainable Seas Alliance, when he noticed Carter entering the room. The CEO's presence at an event supporting their cause raised immediate suspicions. What happened next stunned the audience. Carter approached the podium, asking for a moment to speak. Jake recognized something in his former friend's expression. Not the corporate mask he'd worn in recent months, but something more personal, more vulnerable. "Some of you might not know this," Carter began, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "but Jake and I grew up together on these waters." He pulled out an old photograph from his jacket pocket, showing 2 young boys on a fishing boat. "Our grandfathers taught us the same lessons about respecting the sea." The room fell silent as Carter continued. "What Jake didn't know, what none of you knew, was that the dolphin they rescued." He paused, composing himself. "That dolphin was part of a marine wildlife tracking program my company had abandoned 5 years ago. A program I personally shut down to cut costs." The revelation sent murmurs through the crowd. Jake stood motionless, memories flooding back of childhood summers spent fishing with Carter, sharing dreams of following in their grandfather's footsteps. "The tracking devices we used," Carter explained, "were designed to monitor dolphin populations and migration patterns. When we terminated the program, we left dozens of dolphins tagged, but unmonitored. That mother and calf, they were subjects in our study." Sarah quickly pulled up the marine wildlife database on her tablet, confirming Carter's story. The dolphins they'd rescued had indeed been part of a larger conservation effort, one that could have prevented countless marine casualties if it had continued. Seeing that rescue video, watching Jake risk everything to save those dolphins, Carter's voice cracked. "It reminded me of who we used to be, of what we used to believe in. I've spent years convincing myself that industrial efficiency was the only way forward. But I was wrong." The tension in the room shifted as Carter reached into his briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents. "These are the papers transferring control of Atlantic Fishing Enterprises' local operations to a new community trust. A trust that will be guided by sustainable fishing principles." Jake stepped forward, hardly believing what he was hearing. "James," he said, using his old friend's first name for the first time in years. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to make this right," Carter replied. "The company's board has agreed to a complete restructuring of our local operations. We're going to implement your methods, Jake. All of them. and we want your alliance to help us do it right. The announcement transformed the fundraiser into a celebration of reconciliation and hope. As former adversaries began tentatively discussing collaboration, Jake and Carter stepped outside for a private conversation. "Remember when we used to say we'd protect these waters just like our grandfathers did?" Carter asked, looking out over the harbor where their childhood boats once docked. Jake nodded, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold. "They'd be proud to see us working together again." The story of the Dolphin rescue had come full circle. What began as a moment of crisis had led to a fundamental transformation of their community's relationship with the sea. The rivalry between old friends had evolved into a partnership that would help ensure the survival of their way of life for generations to come. As news of the agreement spread, other fishing communities began reaching out, seeking guidance on making similar transitions. The movement that started with one boat's encounter with a desperate dolphin mother had grown into a model for sustainable fishing practices across the coast. Jake's crew gathered on the deck of the Sea Wanderer that evening, sharing quiet congratulations and planning for the work ahead. The real challenge, implementing these changes on a larger scale, was just beginning, but now they faced it with renewed hope and unexpected allies. In the distance, a pod of dolphins breached the calm waters, their fins catching the last rays of sunlight. Among them, Jake could swear he recognized two familiar shapes, mother and calf, still swimming these waters, still reminding them of their responsibility to the sea that sustained them all.